Today's video will be about the discipline of worship. Worship is a human response to divine initiative. One reason worship should be considered a spiritual discipline is because it is an ordered way of acting and living that sets us before God so He can transform us. If worship does not change us, it has not been worship. To worship is to change. If worship does not propel us into greater obedience, it has not been worship. Just as worship begins in holy expectancy, it ends in holy obedience. Worship enables us to hear the call to service clearly so that we respond, "Here I am, send me." The divine priority is worship first, service second. Service flows out of worship. Service is a substitute for worship. Service as a substitute for worship is idolatry. Praise brings us into worship. Singing, shouting, dancing, rejoicing, adoring, all are the language of praise. The Old Testament covenant required the sacrifice of bulls and goats. The covenant requires the sacrifice of praise. The new covenant requires the sacrifice of praise. Peter tells us that as Christ's new royal priesthood, we are to offer spiritual sacrifices, which means to declare the wonderful deeds of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. In praise, we see how totally the emotions need to be brought into the act of worship. Worship that is solely cerebral is an aberration. Feelings are a legitimate part of the human personality and should be employed in worship. Singing is meant to move us into praise. It provides a medium for the expression of emotion. God calls for worship that involves our whole being. The body, mind, spirit, and emotion should all be laid at the altar of worship. Often we have forgotten that worship should include the body as well as the mind and spirit. The Bible describes worship in physical terms. The root meaning for the Hebrew word we translate worship is to prostrate. The word bless literally means to kneel. Thanksgiving refers to an extension of the hand. What kind of worship does God call for? Wholehearted worship. Worship means to put oneself down to put God up. Bringing pleasure to God is called worship. Everything you do that brings pleasure to God is an act of worship. Every part of church service is an act of worship. Trusting is an act of worship. Obedience is an act of worship. The heart of worship is surrender. So when we're out there living for God and serving God, we should worship Him with our life. Worship is a lifestyle. Thank you.